Within the last few days, President Trump disclosed that he's taking a higher dose of daily aspirin than his doctors recommend, and he's been doing it, he says, for 25 years. He said that in an interview with the Wall Street Journal published just last week. Here to talk more about this is our 9 News health expert, Dr. Pyle Coley. So let's start with the basics. Why would someone want to take aspirin every single day?
Yeah, so aspirin is a medication, same class of medications as naproxen and ibuprofen, and it inhibits your platelets. These are cells that form blood clots. So how do we normally think about aspirin? If I told you guys I'm taking aspirin, what would you say it is?
A headache?
Blood thinner.
There you go, blood thinner.
Ooh.
It doesn't thin your blood. It just makes it less likely to clot. If you cut yourself, you're less likely to bleed, but the consistency of the blood is actually the same. But it does work for headaches as well as inflammation at higher doses.
Okay, so you mentioned dosages. Does it matter, like different dosages for each ailment? Can you take a low dose every single day?
So what do people usually think of as low-dose aspirin? A baby aspirin, right? That's the low-dose aspirin. It works differently. That works to inhibit blood clots. Higher doses, it works to inhibit inflammation, and it works to actually increase risk of bleeding. So the problem with aspirin is it works differently at different doses. You go to a higher dose, it causes more side effects. Now, what are the side effects of aspirin? Bleeding is a big one. And we're not just talking about nuisance bleeding, we're talking about life-threatening bleeding.
So is there harm for taking a high dose like President Trump says he's doing daily?
A huge harm. In fact, a 40 to 50% higher risk of life-threatening bleeding in people who have not had a heart attack or a stroke. So I'm not sure why the president is taking it. We did see the back of his hands, if you remember that video. That's called nuisance bleeding, right? That's where you get a nosebleed, you get bruising. That's not life-threatening, but you could bleed into your stomach, you could bleed into your brain, you could have life-threatening complications with high-dose aspirin.
Would you recommend to any of your patients, even older patients, to take aspirin at any dosage every single day?
What the old saying used to be for aspirin, you guys remember?
No.
An aspirin a day keeps the doctor away.
I thought that was the apple a day.
Yeah. That's what I learned
We
in
made it as
school.
aspirin.
Our moms talked.
So essentially it used to be, we had it a little too simplistic. We used to say everybody over the age of 60 needs an aspirin because it reduces heart attacks and strokes and it reduces your risk of dying, and so you should take it. Now we've realized that that's not really the metric. So there's really two subsets of patients. The one subset is the one that have had a heart attack and stroke. Those are 100% patients that will benefit from taking a low dose aspirin. That's the aspirin 81 milligrams, not the 325, not the 600 milligrams. But the other subset that hasn't yet had a heart attack or stroke, that's a much more nuanced discussion. So I, as a cardiologist, see a lot of patients who have some plaque or some blockages, but they haven't yet had a heart attack. I might put them on an aspirin. They have an elevated marker of risk called a lipoprotein A. I might put them on an aspirin. But you have to keep in mind, like I said, that the risk of bleeding is directly dependent on the dose of aspirin and the duration of aspirin that you're taking. So it's not just about your risk, it's also about your risk of clotting, but also your risk of bleeding. So when I'm starting an aspirin on someone as a preventive therapy, I really weigh those two risks, the risk of having a heart attack or stroke against the risk of bleeding. Now, if you're somebody who's been taking an aspirin for a long time, I would strongly advise that you talk to your doctor before stopping it, because a sudden cessation of aspirin can cause those platelets, those cells that make blood clots, to get a lot stickier and cause a heart attack or stroke. So don't just suddenly stop taking something you're supposed to be taking. If you've had a stent, the aspirin actually keeps the stent open. But taking 4 times the recommended dose, like the president is doing, when we know that the risk of bleeding is higher without any additional benefit, is a little bit of a head scratcher.
Okay, interesting. Good information. Dr. Coley, thank you.